Hi, and welcome to the SSQ Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Quarry, and today I'm joined by Saad Akhtar from our Middle East office. Saad, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Saad, you're based in Dubai, right?
Yes.
Do you want to kind of give me a little bit of background about, your background in recruitment, how you got into it, and sort of how long you've been out in the Middle East?
Yes. So very quickly, I studied law, I did a GDL, and pretty quickly realised being a fee earner was not for me, and sort of fell into recruitment like a lot of people. Started off recruiting in London for 5.5 years.
Yep.
Moved out to the Middle East in 2019, so I've been there for 6 years now.
Okay, nice.
So that's 11 years, in the industry.
Nice. And I guess in terms of obviously a decent stint out in the Middle East now, Dubai-based,
Yeah.
but not limited to Dubai, right? What jurisdictions do you cover in that area?
No, yep. So the office is in Dubai. We're a team of 5 in Dubai, but we cover the GCC as a whole from there. So
Okay.
if I was to draw you a heat map, the real sort of hives of activity are Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and to some extent still Dubai. Dubai is where the largest concentration of lawyers are, but it's very congested and there's a lot of legal talent there already. Whereas if you look at Riyadh and Abu Dhabi in particular, those are markets that are ramping up. Firms are looking to scale up in those jurisdictions, more and more in-house activity as well. We do some work in some of the smaller GCC countries, so Oman, Bahrain. Qatar was very busy pre-World Cup on the construction side primarily. But certainly in the last sort of 3-4 years, I would say Abu Dhabi and Riyadh is where most of our placements have come from.
I remember from when I was in practice, there was always almost a stereotype that in the Middle East, there was a lot of construction, there was a lot of energy-related work. Often there was arbitration work that fell out from things like that going wrong. Is that still a fair generalisation, or is it developed? Because obviously you have the various sort of sovereign investment funds out there who are spending a lot of money around the GCC and elsewhere. So what sort of the range of practice that the law firms are focusing on up there now?
Yeah, look, construction, infrastructure, energy, oil and gas is always going to be big in the Middle East, right? And there's a lot of development even now. Historically, that is where firms made the majority of their money in the region. That is still the case. You look out your window at any given time, there's 12 or 13 cranes, right? There's plenty of development still happening. So a lot of that work still exists. And as you say, much of that will go to dispute or to arbitration. So that is an area that's still very profitable for law firms. But the market and the region has matured an enormous amount. As you say, sovereign wealth funds, some of the biggest global investors are based in the Middle East now, PIF, and the Abu Dhabi sovereigns in particular, but also burgeoning areas like tech, AI, data. What I find is in terms of market trends, generally what we see in London and in Europe and in the US does follow suit in the Middle East, but there's a lag.
Okay.
So, the recent boom in private credit, we're seeing that now in the Middle East.
Okay,
going back a bit further, when GDPR was introduced in the UK, a few years later, the UAE implemented its own data protection laws based on the GDPR. Okay. So, the UAE in particular in the free zones is based on common law, and a lot of the trends that we see in terms of market trends in Europe and in London specifically, we see them follow suit in the Middle East after a bit of a lag.
And obviously there'll be people who have spent, like yourself, a lot of time in the Middle East, but a lot of the time, a lot of the lawyers there won't necessarily have originally been from there. They will have started their career elsewhere and moved over, right? And do you find that the distinction between the international law firms in the area and some of the local law firms who obviously are often operating on the same thing but different elements of a transaction, or there'll be certain practice areas that are restricted to just domestic firms, depending where you are. Do you work across the board, or do you work predominantly with international firms? What's the sort of the range of clients that you guys are typically dealing with?
Look, we've done some work with the local firms. There's 2 or 3 major regional law firms that have a big enough presence that they would require our support. So our client base is very much geared towards international law firms. Certainly in other parts of the world, SSQ would try to focus as much as possible on US law firms, and we mirror that to some extent in the Middle East. But historically, US firms have not been in the region in any great volume and have had very lean offices. So we've got a much more diverse client base, focusing not just on US firms, but Magic Circle, Silver Circle, as well as mid-market English firms. In the last 5-6 years, what you've seen is a huge influx of US law firms that are new to the region, as well as existing firms looking to really scale up their presence, not just in terms of headcount, but also in terms of becoming more full service. So we've because of the track record SSQ has with US firms in other parts of the world, we've benefited from that, and pleased to say that we support most of the major US firms in the region now. So it's a pretty diverse client base. We do as bits and bobs with the regional firms when it lands on our laps. But I think those firms typically do a lot of their recruitment directly anyway. So we where we really add value at a strategic level would be with the international law firms.
Yeah, and as you say, often actually helping these firms move into new areas, new practice areas, sometimes launching offices for them, and it's definitely something that I, from when I was in Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore, Hong Kong in particular, post-COVID had a much tougher time. Lots of, and again, particularly US firms were sort of shifting where their focus was around the world, and perhaps, either getting a bit smaller particularly in China and Hong Kong as an extension, sometimes pulling out altogether. And it feels like the Middle East was quite the beneficiary of actually, that recalibration of what these firms are looking for. Is that fair?
Yeah. And not just from the perspective of the law firms, but also talent. I remember post-COVID, as you say, in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, it was a tough time to be based there as a lawyer.
Yeah.
A lot of these lawyers, if they had British heritage or American or European, they still don't want to go back to that part of the world. Middle East is a good middle ground. So we saw a great sort of influx of CVs from those markets. And
moving between those markets relatively straightforward, if as long as it's common law to common law and same sort of firm, same sort of client base.
It's very viable. The challenge really is one around competition. I mean, the volume of people trying to get into the UAE and the wider GCC is at an all-time high, and has been going up year on year for a number of years now. So what that means is it's a buyer's market. So if you look at associate recruitment, law firms have the ability, they've got more choice than they ever had before. So they have the ability to show more discretion, more longer winded recruitment processes, more technical tests. It's just way more competitive than it ever has been. 10 years ago, it was still a bit of a hardship coming to the region, and it was also seen as a stopgap. I'll go there for 2 years, earn some money tax-free, and then head back to London. These days, people are settling, people are starting a family there. There is, from a professional standpoint, there is much more of a long-term career available for lawyers than there ever has been before. So competition levels are very high, and part of what we have to do when we're speaking to really good candidates from overseas is A, manage their expectations, and B, coach them on how they can stand out in what is a really competitive market.
And so give me an example. If you were talking to a candidate who is, interviewing with multiple firms in the region, what sort of thing should they be sort of thinking about in terms of something that would stand them out as being a little bit different from the rest, the best of the rest?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's stuff that's going to sound really obvious, but people forget or just don't bother to do. So, learn about the region. You're not expected to be an expert in Middle East law or UAE law or Saudi law, but if you show a little bit of interest in, I don't know, if you're a corporate lawyer, look up big deals. If you're a projects lawyer, look up what some major projects that have closed. Just show some awareness of your practice area in the region. Secondly, I think experience in certain major markets is seen as very valuable in the UAE, particularly the US and London. So if you're able to sell that appropriately, firms in the Middle East buy into that, because a lot of the clients here, in terms of sophistication and the type of deals they're doing, mirror what these lawyers might see in London. Or they're the same. Right? Exactly. So being able to talk about your deals in your home jurisdiction in a coherent, sort of structured fashion, as well as showing some basic awareness of the market that you're entering, is stuff that people kind of forget to do. And then, of course, we'll do your general sort of interview prep, how to sell yourself, talk about your ambitions and that kind of thing as well.
And do you find that, because I remember, again, from when I was in practice, I remember certain parts of the Middle East were deemed to be more attractive for talent coming in from outside, and certain firms, if they were trying to grow, and again, this is going back a little bit, so the market is very different now, but people always used to think of Dubai, and they didn't so much think of Saudi or Bahrain and stuff like that. And obviously there's massive growth outside of Dubai, as you say, because it's probably the most developed of the sort of markets or the jurisdictions in the region. I certainly remember once upon a time there used to be additional incentives given to people to persuade them that actually, to spend time in one jurisdiction versus another, there were things to do. Does that still happen, or actually has the supply and demand shifted now that the market is at such a point where actually people are actively looking to go to all parts of the Middle East, and it's where the opportunities are? Yeah,
look, it's definitely shifted, and I'll talk about Saudi separately, but in the UAE, there's a real migration happening from Dubai to Abu Dhabi.
Okay,
and people who 7 years ago I couldn't sell Dubai to are now asking me about Abu Dhabi. And that's driven in part by, a lot of the major government work in Abu Dhabi is the big ticket work available in the UAE, certainly sovereign wealth funds and other sovereign backed entities. It's also driven in part for lifestyle reasons. Abu Dhabi is a slower pace of life. It's more family orientated. Dubai will always have its appeal, right? Dubai's sexy. Dubai's all over Instagram. And for certainly some of the younger associates we speak to, that will be the first choice. But increasingly, as it gets more and more congested, rent prices soar, traffic gets worse and worse.
Yeah.
People are looking to Abu Dhabi more and more, not just from overseas, but also from Dubai. Saudi is a really interesting one. Seen as a hardship, unless you have family ties or religious ties, it's seen as a hardship historically. I'm surprised myself every month, every year that goes by, how much interest there is in Saudi Arabia. And it's not just people used to think I'll go to Saudi and I'll earn 3 more zeros at the end of my salary than anywhere else. It's not the case.
Yeah.
People are moving there for the career advantages. You know, it's possibly the most fastest growing market in the world right now.
Yeah.
Major clients like the PIF and Aramco and various other big Saudi entities continuing to generate lots of really sophisticated work. So, you know, we're placing people into Riyadh directly from London, US, Australia, who are going there as a first choice rather than just, I couldn't get something in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, I'll try Riyadh.
Yeah.
So the interest is higher than it's ever been.
And I think one thing actually, and I think this is testament to how busy the market is and how much it's developed. Certainly, whilst you've been out there and things like that, is that, and previously I've had people like Kumara, people like James Newton on this podcast, and we've seen offices where we've started off relatively small and through essentially the demand of what our clients want, grown and gone from being sort of one person on the ground to 2 to 3, and obviously the Dubai office and the Middle East team more generally is probably one of our fastest growing teams within the entire business. So I guess probably just, and I appreciate it's not your area, but worth noting that we are not just working with law firms now. We've brought it out into sort of a wider diet. So do you want to just talk about the team and what we cover more generally, just so people have an idea of the range of what we can offer people in the region?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when I joined SSQ, I was the only one in the Middle East in a box room without any windows, sat on my laptop. And
look at you now.
And look at me now. Yeah. We've got a window. But we, as you said, we grew not for the sake of it. We grew in response to the market and what our clients needed us for. So at the time I was doing associate recruitment. I've since moved on to focusing on partner recruitment, but we've hired 2 consultants to focus on private practice associate recruitment. We've then grown into in-house, and we have an in-house desk now, which, again, is a response to actually how it started really was our law firm clients and partners saying, look, I have a client looking to grow their in-house legal team. So again, organically, this work came to us. But also, I think from a strategic perspective, the in-house landscape in the Middle East is massive. And, it was a gap for us that we needed to fill. We found Saad, who's a fantastic hire. She's got an exceptional network. So we cover the whole gambit now in terms of private practice and in-house. We're going to continue to grow. We'll be opportunistic, again, not for the sake of it, but because there's just so much more in the market we can be doing. And there's only so many pairs of hands we've got at the moment.
Nice. And I guess the other thing that I always, whenever I have someone come from one of the international offices in with me, and again, we are a truly global business. We help people move around the world at all times. Obviously, the Middle East is a market where a lot of people do come from elsewhere. If you were talking to, and again, I appreciate your focus is more senior, but if we talk across the board, if we're talking to lawyers from NQ upwards, is there a time in their career, and also are there certain practice areas that find it easier to make that move? Because there are certain jurisdictions out there and certain practice areas out there where people can really limit their options. But if you have someone who, let's say they are thinking about that international move, who will find it easiest to move into the region?
It's a really good question. I mean, so the reality is there is no right or wrong time. It's personal to each individual. I've had.
You'll always take their calls.
Yeah, we'll talk to anyone. No, look, I've had people ask me, should I move as an NQ? Should I get a couple of years London experience under my belt? Should I move as a 3? Should I wait till I'm senior associate? There is no right or wrong. Okay. Now, there are pros and cons for each, right? As an NQ, it's a very junior lawyer. That you could argue there are pros to getting some London experience or US experience under your belt before you move. The flip side of that coin is you've moved to UAE in particular, we've got much leaner teams. Then as an NQ, you are more at the coalface. You have more partner face time. You have more client face time. So there's pros and cons. At the senior associate level, you might argue that actually, I've developed a reputation in my home market. I give all of that up for a new market. But actually, again, coming from the leaner market, as a senior associate, your path to partnership is likely to be a lot less congested than, say, in London, where you've got rows and rows of senior associates. So there are pros and cons to each. What we have to do is speak to each individual, look at what their motivations are, look at what they want to achieve in the medium term of their career, and then advise them on that basis rather than giving a blanket, this is the right time to move.
I like the way that you use the word advice, because that's something I always say to people is that, yes, we are recruiters, but actually, if we don't listen first and then react to what someone says and advise them accordingly as to what is going to be best in terms of the opportunities for them, they're going to be the ones who make the decision. But actually, the way that you get the repeat business, the way you get your clients coming to you and saying, actually, I want you to do this for me now, or actually, one of my clients wants you to do this for them now, is by having that much more consultative approach, which again, I think, certainly I know in the UK, in Europe, from my time in Asia, my time now in the States, that is something that makes us very different. And it's really nice to see that you guys actually really mirror that in the Middle East as well.
I mean, it's particularly important when you're dealing with people who are moving not just jobs, but countries, because you're playing with people's lives here, right?
Yeah.
I would say over 50% of the candidates that we're working with at any given time are not looking for a move today. But the idea is they get comfortable with us because we speak to them over a period of months and years.
Yeah.
I'm in London this week meeting with candidates who are thinking about moving to the Middle East at some point in the future, but it's important for us to build that trust early on, give them a bit of FaceTime, buy them a coffee, and then over time, when they are ready, they come back to you because you've given them good advice over the long term rather than just call them up when you've got a job for them.
Yeah, no, it completely makes sense. Well, look, Saad, it's been great to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming in. We would love to get you back on again at some point.
We'd love to.
And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.